Jesus. And I think that's what we've seen and we take care of before we start. If you're part of a life group or a life group leader, you would have heard this week, but we want to just communicate it widely, that Tim and Beck are going to be taking over overseeing the life groups for Kings, supported by Gareth and Tiffany. And if you're not part of a life group at this point in time, then as always, we would really encourage you to think about joining one, to speak to Tim or Beck or Gareth or Tiffany. They're probably the main pastoral groups that we have in Kings. And I can only speak from my personal experience, but throughout my entire time at Kings, I don't know where I would have been without my life group, especially over the last 20-odd months. So, a little plug, where we're going to gather together as a church to wait on God as part of this wait, fast, pray season that we're coming into. And we first mentioned this back at the Vision Night in September. And if you missed the Vision Night, you weren't here for that, then you can let us know and we can send you a recording, a link to the recording of it. Or if you watch back on our YouTube channel, the service from the 7th of November, then we did quite a bit of a recap that morning. We talked about fasting. But today I want us to look at the importance of the times of sitting and waiting. And that's really what we'll be doing tonight when we gather. And we're going to do this by looking at from Luke 10, 38 to 42. I'll also put it on the screen. And it says, as Jesus and the disciples enter her home, her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted, sits here while I do all the work. Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you're worried and upset over these details. There is only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. And when I read this passage, I've been reading over it a number of times over the last few weeks. There's doing absolutely nothing. And it appears that Jesus is actually backing up her sister. So this doesn't seem very fair. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at Martha's story, not just in this passage, but in a few other passages, and see the journey that she goes on. But back in the moment when this was written, the culture of the day, it was a huge importance around hospitality and having people into your home to eat, and in particular, to honor your guest. That was a really big part of the culture. And further on in Luke 14, when we read about when Jesus was challenging some people really around the issue of humility, because he was in a different house and a different meal, and everyone who was there was desperate to sit in what they refer to as the seat of honor for the honored guests. And when you think about it, you kind of go, yeah, I kind of get this. I get where that thinking comes from. I mean, we'll all be planning our Christmas lunches in the corner by the drafty door, are you? Right? You're going to sit them probably right in the middle of the table, as close to the turkey as you can get them. But in those days, hospitality was a huge deal. In fact, it was a massive shame if you ever turned anyone away from your door. Which makes you think what happened to Mary and Joseph going round all the different inns. Really interesting. Something we'll look at in a couple of weeks' time. But apparently, Mary and Martha, their family, had a real reputation for being really great hosts. It's just perfect for her guests. And I think possibly with being the older sister as well, possibly there was more expectation, even more responsibility on her shoulder to kind of take charge and make sure everything happens just so. And maybe that was part of her personality, because there is some people that just want to naturally take charge of something like this. But by contrast, her younger sister is sitting there who will take charge on Christmas Day and organize the meal. Yeah? Well, everyone else sits around drinking Bucks Fizz. Is this resonating with anyone? Right? And it won't be long before perhaps your mother or your wife very calmly and politely suggests that maybe there's something that you could do to help in this whole process. Cooked the centerpiece for the meal. I've cooked the leg of lamb for a Christmas dinner. And every Christmas Day, I get up early. I go to the fridge, open the door, take the leg of lamb out, suddenly realize that just like every other year, the leg of lamb doesn't actually fit in the slow cooker. So then have to go and find a hacksaw and out in the garden cutting this bone off. But then I put it into the slow cooker. Now, this is the most important bit about cooking a leg of lamb in the slow cooker, right? I turn on the slow cooker. And my job now is complete. That's it. I can sit back and relax, having made the main part of the meal. But whenever someone feels that they're doing more than wage, but they're always 5 minutes late back from lunch, that starts to grate on you after a while, doesn't it? Because you're doing more than what they are. And I think Martha, in an attempt to get Mary into trouble, does what lots of older siblings do. They go and tell on their younger sibling. And she's done it by going to Jesus, hoping that Jesus is going to rebuke Mary. Come to her home, and she just wants to honor him and serve him. So what is the problem? Because Jesus himself said that he came to serve, not be served. So what's the issue here? But the problem, as we will discover as we go through this, was that the tasks distracted her from sitting at the feet of Jesus. They distracted Martha from listening to what it was that Jesus had to say. So her priority in that moment was tasks opposed to presence. So we need to make sure that we make the time to sit. And in many ways, I actually think this story is a little bit of a metaphor at the feet of Jesus. And this is kind of building a little bit on what Sasha spoke about last week. I thought Sasha was brilliant last week. I felt I have to up my game now. I've got serious competition. But what do we gain by making that time? And why is it so important? And what Sasha said last week was it's from those encounters, those moments of being in relationship with Jesus, that those are the moments where we become more and more like him. It's in those moments that we find that his desires become our desires. And serving is really important, right? The kingdom of God would collapse in a heap, waiting to hear what he has to say. And it's from that place of sitting and listening, and I believe it's in those moments the Holy Spirit starts to speak to us, inspire us, to stir up those dreams and those words that have perhaps been spoken over us a long time ago, that then lead us to go, okay, God, that's where you want me to serve. I see it now. That's where you want me to focus my time. So it goes presence, then tasks, not tasks, then presence. And I made up my mind I wasn't going to go back over everything that we've talked about with regards to the vision night. But there is one bit of something I want to address this morning. And if you've been around for the last few weeks, you'll know that at this time, we're actively asking for the church family to be part of this. And some of the feedback that we've had has been around our purpose. So we talk about following Christ and bringing others with us. And perhaps what's been presented so far is actually focused more on the taking others with us rather than the... It's easy to see where we need to serve. It's easy to identify the tasks that need to be done. I attended the Highland Business Awards on Thursday as my role as the Developing the Young Workforce Chair for Inverness. And I kid you not, I walked out with 3 new different opportunities to serve our local schools. Right? I actually was scared to speak to anyone else because I was still processing the last conversations that I had. The need is massive, and it's just there, right in front of us. But the reason why I wanted to mention this, and I think it's really important that we grasp hold of this point, because what we have presented so far in terms of the vision, what we'll be looking and praying into tonight, has come off the back of sitting at the... Looking to do as a church in this next season is actually hanging off the 2 prophetic words that we shared as part of the vision night. And the first one was a picture that I believe God gave me in terms of the Jenga block tower. And you always build a Jenga block, 3 blocks, and it always looks the same, doesn't it? And I felt at the beginning of this whole pandemic season, what God had done is he'd come along and gone and knocked down the tower. Really important to acknowledge that it's God that's doing the tearing down. That God that's, I was going to say messing things up, but in a positive way. It's God that's doing that work at the moment. But the invitation for us is to look again at tower. Perhaps it's no longer going to be 3 blocks on 3 blocks. Maybe it's going to look completely different. And then Sarah had a picture of around the fence that we had in our garden. And the short version is the old fence had been bulldozed, and the new fence that we have is further out than before. We have a new boundary, and this is not a time for shrinking back, but stretching out into what it is that God has for us. And the reason why I wanted to mention this, and quite directly, is and the stuff that we're going to do. But I wanted us to keep bringing us back to these prophetic words which we believe God has given us. Because this has started not just with Sarah and I sitting at the feet of Jesus, but as an eldership, this is what we've been doing behind the scenes. And tonight is an invitation for everybody to come and join us as we all sit at the feet of Jesus. We all start to hear what he is saying for us in this season. So we are really pushing that invitation to come and be a part of this process and speak in to what it is that we feel God saying. In 1 Corinthians, it tells us that we know in part and we prophesy in part. So if I might have part of it, and Leanne's got part of it, and Ivana's got part of it, and Benita starts by sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to what he has to say. And from that place, we start to see what it is, the areas that he is calling us into. The next thing we want to do is we want to hold the space open. So back into our story, it tells us that Martha was distracted by the dinner that she was preparing, the inevitable distractions of life that come along. And every week at our staff meeting on a Tuesday, we hear amazing stories from the team about some of the encounters that they've had in this building throughout the week. And I'm determined what you guys hear on a Sunday, so we can help people see the bigger picture of what goes on here, really 7 days a week. One of the things that we're working on at the moment, we're doing some tweaks to our website, and we're going to have a blog that's part of it that's hopefully going to be a place where some of these stories can be told. But Dave Saunders has told some really incredible stories over the last few weeks about something that's happening at the bike shed at these poetry nights on a Friday night. And if you don't know who Dave is, he's not here this morning. He's away treating his wife Ruth to a weekend away. He seems to get himself into a lot of trouble with his wife, so it's probably long overdue. But Dave is a pioneer, and the same way that Becky comes as her role as the Goodness Project Coordinator, because we have a joint project with the Barn Church of Scotland and here at King's. And I actually think these ecumenical partnerships is one of the really cool things that God's already doing in this season and that we're going to see more of. But back to Dave, and he told this story, and if we can get the sound ready, Duncan, I asked him to record it because I didn't think I could do it justice. If you want to watch the screen, this is Dave's story from this last week.
A few weeks ago, I was at the bike shed for our poetry night. That happens every Friday night, and this Friday was actually the bonfire night, the 5th of November. And I was there at the bike shed for this poetry night, and if I'm honest, I was pretty tired. I was in a bit of a grump, and I would rather have been out watching the fireworks. But I was there, but not really there, if you know what I mean. My mind was elsewhere. And this night was a particularly wordy poetry night. So not only am I tired, I'm also struggling to engage with the poetry and the readings that have been said by our little community. It almost felt like there was a sort of a haze over the night. It was a struggle for me anyway to engage. And until this guy who comes every week, he writes constantly, and this night is his way of expressing what he writes during the week. And he stood up and started reading what he had written, poem or mid-reading. So he was reading the words of Jesus. he read a part of the Sermon on the Mount and then returned back to his sentences that he was reading. And it was just like, for a moment, the haze lifted and the fog lifted, and I heard the words of Jesus spoken into the place. The words of Jesus from 2,000 years ago suddenly get spoken into this little coffee shop in Merkinch. And it just, I don't know if anyone else noticed it, but to me, it was like there was a glimpse of heaven that happened on that night. Just amazing. And I was reflecting on that throughout the week. It just kind of really moved me. What were the ingredients to, how did that happen? What made that thing happen? And how can we replicate it? That's kind of our typical thing that we do, isn't it? We want to make it happen over and over again. And actually, this was just a moment of heaven that was me and my colleagues in the Methodist Church, we would often talk about holding the space. And that would be our roles as pioneers, is to sort of hold back the pressures. I almost feel like, in a Christ-like pose, holding back the pressures of finances and all the other pressures that go along to running a project or an organisation or a building or whatever it is. And that's sort of our role, is to hold back the pressures and hold the pressures so that we can hold the space so that God can do what God does. And it reminded me of a lesson I learned very early on in my youth work when I was asked to work with a kid, a young lad who's struggling to work engage in school. And we played Uno for an hour and laughed and joked and took the mick out of each other. And the bell went. That's the first time I've seen that lad laugh and smile in 2 years that this lad's been in this school. And I believe that was a glimpse of heaven there. I just didn't know it. And had the teacher not told me, I wouldn't have known a miracle had occurred. And all we had done was hold the space for that lad. So holding space is really important. And I really believe that what happens at the bike shed, what happens at the factory coffee shop, what happens at Fisher's and all the other areas and the work clubs, is that we're doing way more than serving coffee and putting out toys. We're holding the space open so that God can do what God does.
One of the things that struck me when Dave said was that he was there but not really there. And I guess that's maybe how Martha perhaps felt in our story. She was there but not really there. And as Dave says many about the practical realities of running a church and trying to keep a balanced budget so we can keep employing the staff to keep getting the stories, and sometimes it feels you're on a treadmill. But for me, I felt quite challenged by that, and it was a real reminder to me about what are we doing to hold that spaces. I love that picture. What are we doing to hold the spaces, hold back the pressures? Because I think in our story, there was no doubt that Martha felt the pressures, the expectations to be a good host. And in that, she struggled to see the value of the space that Mary was helping create so that Jesus could do what Jesus does. And tonight, I was thinking about tonight, and, one of the pressures we'll have is to not fill the space, to actually sit and wait and listen to God. And a number of years ago, some of the men from Kings went down to Kilrock Castle for a weekend. I don't know, Cliff, you were there, you'll remember this. And at Kilrock Castle, there's a little chapel there. And Tom decided to put the invitation out for any of the guys that want to get up early this Saturday morning and meet him there at like 7 o'clock in the morning to sit in silence and wait and go on, right? And you're there for a men's weekend, you're thinking, well, we better at least attempt to appear to look a little bit holy. So we rock up and join Tom in this time of silence. And, sitting in silence sometimes is not as easy as what it sounds, yeah? Now, for those of you that have had young kids and stuff, you're sometimes going, I'd love it if I could just get 10 minutes peace, right? But actually to sit there and just wait, it's quite a discipline, fiddling about, and then I'll just look at a Bible verse on my phone or try to do something to almost kind of fill the space. But what happens is the pressure sometimes we feel to do something means we're in danger of missing what God wants to do in that moment. And tonight, we're coming tonight with actually very little agenda other than some pens and some flip charts to record what we think and to see what he has to say for us. Dave said that, when he heard the words of Jesus spoken into the haze, he saw a glimpse of heaven. And, that's really our prayer for these evenings, this season that we're in, as we come together to see what it is we need to do next. And that's our prayer. And then the last thing, and this might seem a little bit left field, get ready to give up your anger. And I want us to do that in a little moment. I'm going to ask Sarah and the band to come back and just do a little bit more worship to finish our time this morning. I think God has already started doing something this morning, and we'll maybe make a bit more space to do a little bit more. But last week when Sasha spoke on Psalm 37, I read on a little bit further to see what it said. And in Psalm 37, 7-9, it says, "Be still in the presence of the Lord and wait patiently for him to act. Don't worry about evil people who prosper or fret about their wicked schemes. Stop, for those who trust in the Lord will possess the land." Oh Lord, let us be a people that possess our land. But it was that bit about stop being angry that kind of really, really spoke to me. About just as we come into the presence of God, we start, how difficult the last 20 months have been, the hardship, the hurt, the frustration. And people are angry and frustrated just all the time is what it feels like at the moment. And I think for Martha, she carried that anger. She was angry at Mary. She was possibly even angry at Jesus for the way that he backed up Mary. And she was in danger of missing what was happening in the moment because of her anger. And later on we read about when Mary and Martha's brother Lazarus died. And they sent word to Jesus, "Would you come and heal him?" And Jesus rocks up after 4 days of them waiting. And in John 11, 20-21, it says, when Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if only you had been here, my brother would not have died." And when you read on, you get that sense of anger and frustration from both Mary and Martha about, Jesus, where were you? Right? In our darkest moment, where were you? Because we sent word for you to come and you didn't respond. It took you 4 days to turn. Jesus, where are you? Where have you been for this last 20 months? Where have you been? And I think if you take that before Jesus, you know what? I think he can handle it. I think he's okay with that. But don't let the anger and the frustration of the past get in the way of seeing what God is doing in this moment. For Mary and Martha, Jesus brought life into their situation. Where there was death, he brought life. He did it for them, and he can do it for you. And I think something changed for Martha in that moment. I think Martha, she may have taken her anger to Jesus, but she left it there. And the next time we read about Mary and Martha in John 12, 1-3, it says 6 days before the Passover celebration began, Jesus and Lazarus was among those who ate with him. Then Mary took a 12-ounce jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard, and she anointed Jesus' feet with it, wiping his feet with her hair, and the house filled with the fragrance. And while this was happening, others looked on in anger. If you're familiar with the story, why are you doing this? Why are you wasting this expensive thing? We could have used the money for the poor. But unlike the first 2 times we hear about Martha, she doesn't actually say a word. In this moment, she's absolutely silent. She's not one of the people having a go at Mary. And I think by this time, she finally got what Mary had got the first time. And what she got is actually that Jesus loves you. Jesus is for you. He is not against you. As we celebrated and remembered in communion that he's laid down his life for you. And actually, I think one of the invitations in this moment is Jesus wants to take your anger and exchange it for peace. To take your anger and exchange it for the peace that he has promised us. So as the band comes back, and we're going to worship a bit more. And as we think about gathering, not just tonight, but the other nights that we've got planned, I guess my plea is let us be a body, a church family that's still. Let's be still in the presence of the Lord. Let's wait patiently for him to act. Let's not worry about evil people. Let's stop being angry. Let's turn from our rage and let's trust in the Lord so we might be a people that possess this land. Sarah.